If Resident Evil is the king of survival action horror, then Dead Space aimed to be the pretender to the throne, bringing together Capcom's early Dread and latter-day over-the-shoulder shooting into one gory package. Borrowing from Alien and other sci-fi classics, the 2008 release put players in the role of Isaac Clarke, an engineer trapped on a derelict spacecraft. Soon Isaac finds out the ship isn't as empty as it seems, as a strange alien artifact has transformed everyone on board into hideous, flesh-eating creatures, each more horrific than the last. Dead Space crafts a horrifying experience by limiting the player. Isaac is short on ammo, he rarely knows what's going on in the continually shifting story, and he's most in danger of what he can't see. So much of the disturbing atmosphere is built on what you hear, and the amazing sound design uses audio to fashion an entire deadly world around Isaac. Though the sequel pulled back on the scares somewhat in favor of cinematic action, the original remains trapped in our nightmares. Soma has problems, largely from the clumsy stealth section, but it also has, hands down, one of the most unpleasantly disturbing stories of anything in this list. To explain why would ruin it, but this plays with ideas of consciousness and what makes you in a terrifying way. When you're not exploring the rusting, decrepit undersea base of Pathos 2, you're playing with some pretty heavy metaphysic concepts fit to give you nightmares. This is a world, filled with broken machines full of glitching human consciousnesses and slimy growths, that expands and morph into something terrible the longer you spend exploring. The undersea and biotech elements make a Bioshock comparison hard to avoid, but while there are similarities, man's hubris and science push too far, especially, this is far more unpleasant and ethically shocking. The new safe mode means you can also now play it just for the story, finish it and see if you can sleep after. Outlast offers a first-person trek through a setting literally no one in real life would willingly check out, an old asylum that seems abandoned, but also strangely very active. At night. In the mountains. Miles from help. Who does that? The setup alone is perfect horror fodder, but this plays out like found footage. The game, via clever use of a video camera's night vision mode to see in the dark. The grainy, glowing green view it creates gets a little too close to real life as well. It's one part exploring to two parts follow shadowy, wheezing shapes in the black distance through a viewfinder while cowering behind a table. Scary enough already, the perfection of its pixelated whirring focus pulls only adds to the atmosphere. It's a great game to play with friends too, because you'll both be screaming at some point. Silent Hill, as a franchise, is home to some of the most frightening enemies and situations in gaming history, but the series' most abiding horror is Silent Hill 2. This PS2 classic manifests our deepest fears as flesh, to reveal there is no greater evil than our own imagination. Though he'll encounter creatures like the iconic Nurses and Pyramid Head, protagonist James Sunderland is far more threatened by his personal demons. And the empty town of Silent Hill brings them all to the surface. James has returned to Silent Hill answering a letter that seems to come from his dead wife, but all he finds are reminders of his own anguish and guilt over her death. Every corner of the town is inhabited by some new horror, but James has to push past his fears if he ever wants to know what's going on. You and he will not like what he finds beyond them. Silent Hill 2 doesn't just present you with a horror game worth playing, but a story worth being listened to, parsed, and gawping awfully about. The deeper you go, the worse it gets. The only reason this isn't our top horror game full stop is that it's VR, which obviously limits a lot of people's access to it. However, if you can get a VR headset, this is an essential horror game. It's one of the greatest playable interpretations of the source material ever made, from swinging axes or stabbing screwdrivers into zombies' heads, to cautiously exploring rotting houses, terrified of every corner. This absolutely nails the zombie horror fantasy. There's a semi-open world too where you explore and revisit hubs, crisscrossing locations in search of valuable resources, enemies, and allies to help. It's also got nothing to do with the comics or TV show beyond the zombies, so you don't need to be a fan to enjoy it, either. It seems almost unimaginable that over 20 years after its original PS1 release the classic Resident Evil 2 is back on the best horror games list. But then we are talking about Resident Evil 2 Remake, A from-the-ground-up remake of the original game that honors the past while building a future for the franchise with a game nearly 2 decades old. It's a success, and high on this list, because of how it melds old and new so perfectly. It's a perfect retelling of Leon and Claire's original attempts to escape a zombie-filled Raccoon City, with all the monsters, set pieces and story beats you remember. But it's also built with today's horror sensibilities, merging an almost beautiful level of indulgent gore with tight gunplay, clever puzzles, and some beautiful levels. This is as essential now as the original game was back in the day. If you brought together the world's most idiosyncratic game auteur and one of its greatest film monster creators and they didn't make one of the oddest, most horrible games yet released, you'd be pretty upset. Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro's playable teaser for the now canned Silent Hills places you in a single, infinitely looping hallway, and proceeds to find 1,000 ways to terrify you. This is no idle boast. One member of the game's Radar Plus team was unable to play this game with the lights off and was forced to turn the sound down to make it tolerable. Countless games have been inspired by elements of the Alien franchise, be it James Cameron's Space Marines, Ellen Ripley's Fortitude, or the chilling power of silence in a soundtrack. Despite all that, Alien Isolation may be the series' greatest gaming triumph. It takes the gut-wrenching fear fostered by the lone xenomorph in the original film and extends it into a lengthy game. Isolation's tense survival gameplay keeps the pulse pounding for hours and hours. You take on the role of Ripley's daughter, Amanda, searching a derelict space station for her mother, only to find the same beast she fought. You're constantly on guard from the cinematic AI of your alien hunter. This means holding your breath as you narrowly avoid detection, or screaming in terror after failing to reach safety. The atmosphere the game sustains is impressive enough, and it deserves even more credit for taking the xenomorph, a movie monster bordering on cliché due to overexposure, and making it terrifying once again. Most games can make you jump, they can make scream, but few can make you doubt yourself in real life. Layers of Fear initially appears very familiar as you explore a spooky, creepy, and cavernously empty house. The gothic story unravels slowly as you play an unnamed artist returning home. It soon becomes clear though that madness has overtaken the painter and it expresses itself in the unreliable narration of the physical world. Doors disappear and corridors warp out of shape just in the corner of you. The game rearranges itself in such a way to recreate the main character's madness that only a few hours in and you'll find yourself questioning everything. Was that desk on this side of the room last time you looked? Are you sure? Add to that the nature of the protagonist's illness, an obsessional painting made from less than savory materials, and you have one of the greatest horror games of all time. It could have been a disaster, a clunky, forced update to a revered series, that left fans clamoring for the bombastic nonsense of Resident Evil 6. But Resi 7 is a triumph, smartly feeding off the best horror movies of the last 20 years, effortlessly easing all that edgy new into a recognizable, modern reinvention of the series. The central story is fantastic, the mysteries artfully concealed and your tormentors, the Bakers, are brilliantly subversive. Switching the action to first person adds some VR possibilities, but also makes the horror feel uncomfortably close, grueling, compelling stuff, in a setting you'll remember long after exploring it up close. But perhaps the cleverest trick is just how Resi it all feels. The safe rooms have the same sense of unsettling respite, ammo feels desperately scarce, and the boss fights have the right mix of terror and glowing, oozing bits to shoot. It's a tight, smart horror game, and far better than most fans dared hope. It's not the scariest, or most subtle, game on this list, but a brilliant and chilling rebirth,